Chairman of the Standing Committee of Hainan Provincial People's Congress, Mr. Hu Guanghui, to brief us on issues on the law on Hainan Free Trade Port and take your questions. First, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Wang Chaoying for introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, friends from the media, good morning. Law on Hainan Free Trade Port of People's Republic of China was approved by the 29th session of the Standing Committee of the 13th National People's Congress on June the 10th. And this law received a lot of attention from the public. This is an important step to exercise decision made by State Council. And this will help to boost the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port based on rule of law. Now I would like to give you the procedures on the legislation about this law. The Standing Committee of the National People's Congress attached great importance to the legislation of this law. The State Council has published a guideline on establishing the law, and also we hear the important remarks made by General Secretary Xi Jinping. The Hainan Provincial People's Government also provide a lot of suggestions on the drafting of the law. The legislation has followed the instructions from the National People's Congress. And also, this is part of the plan for the legislation in 2019. Chairman Li Zhanshu also heard a lot of feedback for the legislation of the law on the Hainan Free Trade Port. And also, Mr. Wang Chen has become the leader for the drafting of the law on the Hainan Free Trade Port. The Standing Committee of the National People's Congress also set up a special Legal Affairs Commission on the legislation. Mr. Wang Chen also led a special task force to do a field trip to understand the actual situation of the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port. And officials have visited the Hainan province for several times to hear the feedback for the legislation. After several times of amendment, the draft law has been submitted to the 24th session of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. In April, June, during the 28th and the 29th session of the Standing Committee of the NPC, on June the 10th, during the 29th session, the law on Hainan Free Trade Port has been approved. During the drafting procedures, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress has exercised a democratic manner to draft the law. On 2 times, they have solicited public opinions. On May the 24th, the Standing Committee also holds a special session to hear the feedback from the public and also make a lot of assessment on this law. All the sectors has identified that for the draft law is well established, and suggests for this law to be passed by the 29th session of the Standing Committee of the NPC. For this law, it focuses on the key task, that is the trade and investment liberalization and facilitation. It also focuses a lot of key policies. There are 5 key areas of this law. So especially it focuses on the legislation basis. China has paid a lot of attention for this legislation, and the State Council, on necessary, will delegate the Hainan Provincial People's Congress to exercise certain duties, and also it delegates powers to the provincial government of Hainan and the Standing Committee of the Hainan Provincial People's Congress to set up local legislation. And also it pays a lot of attention on the trade and investment liberalization and the facilitation. And also it will exercise pre-establishment national treatment and negative listing to the foreign investments. It will improve the IP protection, and also exercise the negative listing, and also ease the market access, and implement a commitment system for market access. And also we have a well-established fiscal and taxation system. And we will streamline the taxation scheme after Hainan port started to exercise the close-off operation, and will also provide some preferential policies to individuals and organizations, and also will exercise the strictest level of ecological protection. And also for those who will damage the ecological environment in Hainan Free Trade Port, we will hold all of those entities accountable. At the same time, we will roll out corresponding regulation. And there were several significance for this law. This is an important strategy to exercise decisions made by the CPC Central Committee and the State Council to build the Hainan Free Trade Port. It is designed and instructed by General Secretary Xi Jinping. And it is a strategic policy that has been put forward by China. And by building the Hainan Free Trade Port, by having this law, it will provide a legal basis. It will help to promote the rule of law and also to facilitate the trade and investment liberalization. And also by building the Hainan Free Trade Port, it will help China to further open up and promote the economic globalization. By establishing the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, making sure that Hainan Free Trade Port can be exercised according to law, and also to build a sound business environment that based on rule of law, internationalization, and facilitation. It also shows China's willingness to further opening up. And by setting up this law, it will also promote the innovative development of Hainan Free Trade Port. The core of the Hainan Free Trade Port is focusing on the innovation. We have to explore new supervision mechanism to manage the Hainan Free Trade Port. And under the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, it is necessary for the provincial government to implement some local legislation to further strengthen the supervision of the Hainan Free Trade Port, so that we can ensure that all the regulations can be implemented in a timely manner. And all of these regulations and measures should be reinforced with each other. That is my brief introduction. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Feng Fei. Ladies and gentlemen, friends from the media, good morning. First of all, I would like to say a big thank you to the public for your support and attention to the building of the Hainan Free Trade Port. So I would like to review some of the important time slots for the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port. Back in 2013, during the celebration of the 30th anniversary of the economic zone for Hainan, General Secretary Xi Jinping also assigned new mission for the development of Hainan province. He supports the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port with Chinese characteristics. And later on, we started to provide a framework for the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port. 1 year later, the Standing Committee of the NPC approved the draft law on the Hainan Free Trade Port. For the implementation of the law on Hainan Free Trade Port is of great significance. The provincial government in Hainan attached great importance to the implementation of the law on Hainan Free Trade Port. Since the promulgation of this law, in the past 10 days, we have done 3 work. First, The second day after we promulgate the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, we organized a provincial session to study the law. From the 17th to the 18th of June, we also organized a plenary session for the Hainan Provincial People's Congress and also made all-out arrangements for the implementation of the law. And on the 19th, we also invited the special guest from the Legal Affairs of the NPC to give further explanation on the law on Hainan Free Trade Port. Going next, we have to focus on 3 areas of key work. First, we will provide more education and publicity of the law on Hainan Free Trade Port. So we have already come up with a plan to provide more education to the public on this law. We will use multiple platforms and the channels to publicize the law, and this education will happen in the cities, in the enterprises, in the rural areas, in the schools. For the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, it's a compulsory session for the local officials. And during the publicity of the law, we will focus on several targeted areas, and we will also consider the actual situation in different districts. But to different groups of people, we will provide a number of seminars to explain the law. When necessary, we will also roll out tests to help people better understand the law. And second, we will help the public to exercise the law on Hainan Free Trade Port. And of course, we'll work with the State Council to come up with concrete measures on the close-off operation for the Hainan Free Trade Port. At the same time, we'll streamline the taxation scheme in the Hainan Free Trade Port, making sure that all the measures can be implemented effectively. Also, we will look at the law to understand the responsibilities for the provincial government and the Hainan Provincial People's Congress. And also, we will take innovative measures for the local legislation for the Hainan Free Trade Port. When necessary, we will roll out corresponding regulations and stipulations to better manage the Hainan Free Trade Port, making sure all of those local legislation can be implemented, making sure that the operation of the Hainan Free Trade Port could be based on law and regulations. Third, we will govern the province based on rule of law and create a good legal environment in Hainan province. So we will promote just jurisdiction and also delegate powers to certain sectors and roll out reforms in the Hainan province and improve the supervision mechanism in the Hainan Free Trade Port. The Standing Committee of Hainan Provincial People's Congress will roll out a decision to implement the law on Hainan Free Trade Port and make arrangement for the implementation. And also, we will come up with regulations and measures to strengthen the implementation of the law. On top of the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, we will work on local regulation to better supervise the business environment of the Hainan Free Trade Port, making sure that Hainan can be operated based on law, and also to promote high-level reform and opening up in Hainan province. Now is the Q&A session. Please raise your hand to raise the question. With China Daily, my question is about the liberalization of the investment and opening up of the market access. So we realized that for the Hainan Free Trade Port, we have to take some measures to guard against the risk. I would like to further understand this aspect. As you also talk about when we open up the market access, how can we protect the red line? Thank you very much. You actually raised a very important question. I would like to explain to you in details. For the provincial government of Hainan province, exercise the important guidance made by General Secretary Xi Jinping on guarding against risk. We are making sure that we have to guard against the risk when we are rolling out the reform and opening up. We need to improve our capability to guard against the risk. Supervision is our key before we roll out the reform. We focus on guarding against the risk. We have organized 6 times of the meetings to understand the work report on guarding against risk. We also set up a special task force to guard against the risk. We review different kinds of risks in different sectors. And also we establish an effective mechanism to guard against the risk. We earnestly implemented the action plans in guarding against the risk. Each one of the measures will come up with a corresponding working mechanism and the measures. Right now, we have not yet seen any systemic risks in the province. Here, I would like to give you some examples in certain areas. First, we will focus on the smuggling issue. We have 4 senior officials to form a special task force to review the offshore activities, commerce activities. We stick to our principle, that is to crack down all the illegal activities. And also, we will try to forestall all of those risks and take comprehensive measures to diffuse all of those risks. At the same time, we also give a lot of education about the law. We are using big data to crack down on the smuggling activities. We are trying to lock down some of the illegal behaviors. And also, we send out text messages to create a deterrent effect. Started from 2017, we work with China Customs and roll out more than 20 times of crackdown activities. For individuals who are violating the law, and these people will be deprived of 3 years of rights to purchase in Hainan Free Trade Port. And also, we are improving the credit systems to crack down some of those trust-breaking activities. We also have a interagency task force to work together with Shanghai, Hangzhou to have remote law enforcement. Because these 2 cities is very developed in the e-commerce business, so making sure that we could crack down all of those illegal e-commerce behavior. As for the zero tariff goods, we also come up with a number of measures. We have set up special network to crack down on the smuggling activities. What we are doing is to prevent the smuggling of the zero tariff goods. Second, we try our best to mitigate the risk in the taxation. Last year, after we rolled out the plan for developing the Hainan Free Trade Port, and there were a lot of preferential policies coming up. There were many zero-tariff goods flow into the Hainan Free Trade Port. We have diversified products, and for certain market entities, they are trying to seize the loophole of the regulation. So we have to protect these goods, making sure that Hainan Free Trade Port can be operated in a legal-based manner. We have to strengthen our supervision and focus on the procedure of the registration. We will find out some of the illegal products that has been flowed into the Hainan Free Trade Port. And also we are focusing on specific industries and when we are attracting investment. We were trying to change the mindset for the market entities. For the market entities who are about to enter into the free trade port, we will give them more explanation about the preferential policies in Hainan Free Trade Port. For the shell companies who try to seize the loopholes, we will not allow these companies to enter into the free trade port. And second, we will focus on the policies. And the provincial government published a notification on the preferential policies in Hainan Free Trade Port. And we try to better regulate the market entities who have been operating in the free trade port. And the third, we will strengthen the day-to-day management of the market entities, especially for the information technology platform for the market entities. If we found some of the market entities are not operating according to our laws, and in the future, we will strengthen our supervision and the random inspection. We will learn from the experience from other countries. For certain illegal acts, we will impose penalties when necessary. Third, we will try to defuse the financial risks when necessary. For Hainan province, we are not that prosperous in the financial development. In general, the risk is controllable. But for the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port, we have to further open up the financial sector in the free trade port and develop a new type of finance. We will make good use of the financial resources because in the future we will face more challenges. The provincial government have taken a proactive manner to establish a special task force on financial management. We need to build a special platform to ensure free and convenient trade and investment, cross-border transaction and transportation. For certain financial institutions, if they are holding eligible certificates, we ensure that there is a free and convenient commerce. And at the same time, we'll focus on the safety of the real estate sector. In the future, we have to sum up all the lessons we have learned. And also we need to benchmark the standards for the close-off operation in Hainan province. And we will learn the latest policies and regulations to send up alarms for the risks, to better analyze the risks, making sure that all of those risks can be guarded against. Thank you. Next question, please. With CMG, my question is to the Deputy of NDRC. We do have a special task force from the NDRC on promoting the Hainan Free Trade Port. So what measures will be done by the NDRC to work with other departments to implement the law on Hainan Free Trade Port? The drafting and the implementation of the law on Hainan Free Trade Port has provided a basis to further develop the Hainan Free Trade Port. For the office of the NDRC, we'll work with the Hainan provincial governments. We'll do a good job in implementing the law on Hainan Free Trade Port and implement the local legislation as well. So from a legal aspect, we aim to achieve more progress. We will focus on 3 areas. First, we will focus on the implementation of the law and the local legislation so that we can provide a legal foundation for the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port. According to the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, before we started the close-off operation of Hainan Province, the State Council and the Hainan Provincial People's Congress will work on a transitional plan to implement the law on the Hainan Free Trade Port. We will also look at the earlier released regulation. We have already compiled all of those regulations, making sure that we give full play to those regulations on regulating the Hainan Free Trade Port. And also, we will promote the local legislation so that it could lay a solid foundation to ensure the close-off operation of the Hainan province. And the second will focus on the documentation to support the implementation of the law on Hainan Free Trade Port. So we will establish all of those regulations by phases and by different stages to ensure free and convenient trade investment, cross-border transaction, flow of people, transportation, and also secure the safe data transmission. So the law on Hainan Free Trade Port shall be exercised together with the correspondent local legislation. After we draft one law, we will release those laws in time. And third, we will do more for better preparation for the close-off operation of Hainan province. So we will improve the special supervision system for customs in the Hainan Free Trade Port. Where necessary, we will work with several sectors to build relevant infrastructure at the border ports. And also, we need to offer more policies to facilitate the customs clearance. And we need to set up a 1+N working mechanism to do a good job in the preparation for the close-off operation for the Hainan Free Trade Port. Thank you. Next question, please. With Sansha Satellite, according to the Article 29 of the law on the Hainan Free Trade Port, for products, if they flow from the Chinese mainland to the free trade port, some of the tariffs will be exempted and some of the tax will be reduced. What is the consideration? Thank you. So after the free trade port being operated in a closed-off manner, for the Chinese mainland and the Hainan Free Trade Port will abide by different taxation scheme. According to Provision 27, some of the taxes will be streamlined and simplified. For example, the value-added tax, the consumption tax, the vehicle purchase tax, and the maintenance tax. So these tax will be combined and streamlined. And also we will levy tax on the retail tax for the goods and the cargoes. For some of the goods that has been flew from Chinese mainland to the Hainan Free Trade Port, we need to return the import tax for these products. After these products enter into the Hainan Free Trade Port, after the enter into the retail area, once again, these products will be imposed by tax once again. So this is a duplicated tax imposition. So this is the first consideration. And the second, by having this regulation, after we receive the products from the mainland, when we're looking at some of the products that enter into the free trade port with zero tariff, these mainland products are able to compete equally with the zero tariff products. So this is about the fair competition. So that's why we have the provision 29. So after receive some of the products from the Chinese mainland, and then we will exempt some of the tax from those goods. And later on, so we will work with relevant departments of the State Council and come up with detailed arrangements. Next question, please. The China News Service. To implement the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, we do need other departments to come up with local legislation. I would like to understand the arrangement from Hainan provincial government. I would like to invite Mr. Hu Guanghui, my colleague, to answer your question. Thank you for your question. For the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, for the implementation, we do need some corresponding local legislation, and the NPC will delegate powers to the Standing Committee of the Hainan Provincial People's Congress to establish local legislation. Under the guidance of the National People's Congress, we will exercise our autonomous rights to draft the local legislation to further implement the law on Hainan Free Trade Port. So just now, the member of the NPC Standing Committee, Mr. Wang Chaoyu, gave you a lot of details. And for Hainan province, we focus on 3 areas of work. First, we will come up with a framework on the local legislation to better implement the law on Hainan Free Trade Port. Especially, we focus on the 4 pillar areas. We will come up with a regulation list. In Hainan Free Trade Ports, we will implement all of those regulations by phases and by stages, making sure that corresponding local legislation can be drafted and implemented before the close of operation of the Hainan Free Trade Port. Especially, we will focus on the areas on the trade and investment, cross-border transaction, flow of people, transportation, and the safe data transmission. And at the same time, we focus on the ecological protection, industrial development and talent support, trade and investment liberalization, and facilitation. We will come up with local legislation that echoes with the implementation of the law on Hainan Free Trade Port. Second, we will work tirelessly. We will come up with some of the regulations to better develop the Hainan Free Trade Port. We will focus on certain key areas in the free trade port. And right now, we are trying to improve the business environment ordinance and also to promote the fair competition in the free trade port and also the bankruptcy regulation in the free trade port. Right now, we are reviewing some of the provisions of those drafts. Hopefully, all of these regulations can be rolled out soon. Third, we will follow a scientific and democratic way for the local legislation, and we have to abide by Chinese characteristics and learn from international experience. And we will look into the actual situation of the Hainan Free Trade Port. We need to free our minds and give full play to the role of the Standing Committee of the National People Congress, and we will encourage the general public to join us in this local legislation. At the same time, we will also establish a legal commission in Hainan province. We also need to organize a think tank to collect the wisdom and thoughts for the local legislation. As for the legislation, we will focus on every aspect in the operation of the Hainan Free Trade Port, so that all of these legislation will be feasible in the future. By having all of those local legislation, we will provide strong support for the exercising of the law on the Hainan Free Trade Port. Thank you. Next question, please. Thank you. So right now, Hainan Free Trade Port will attract more investment and trade and also a lot of talents. I would like to understand for the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, what are some of the highlights in attracting talents? Thank you for your question. The issue of talent is a core issue in the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port, especially for the attraction for the talents in Hainan Free Trade Port. If we look at the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, especially Chapter 6, the industry development and the talent support. For this whole chapter, it actually gives a lot of provisions on how we will support the talents. Especially, I would like to mention provision 44, 45, 46, and the 47. There were detailed explanation on our work. To summarize, first, we need to ensure that the overseas talents are able to enter into the Hainan Free Trade Port. For example, we would like to provide an effective visa service to these talents. Right now, Hainan province provide visa-free services to 59 countries. And of course, in the future, we'll provide more services in terms of the facilitation so that these people can stay in Hainan province for long duration. But first of all, they need to enter into Hainan province. And second, we have to make good use of those talents. That means we need to provide a good platform for these talents. They need to have a work permit. So we will roll out the negative listing management measure for these overseas talents. I believe around the globe, I don't think many countries roll out the negative listing mechanism to manage the talents. So right now, we are still working on that, on the negative listing system to attract the talents from overseas. Third, we will do our best to verify the qualification of the overseas talents. So we are actually exercising a single-way verification listing system. But of course, we need to provide more services to the talents for example, services to support their work and support their life. We have come up with a preferential policy to support these talents. Thank you. Next question, please. With peoples.net, for the law on Hainan Free Trade Port and gave more legislative power to the National People's Congress and the Standing Committee of Hainan Provincial People's Congress. Can you tell us more about this? According to Article 10 of the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, it actually gave a lot of power to the Standing Committee of the NPC for legislation. So when necessary, the State Council will come up with more legislation to better regulate the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port. By establishing the law on the Hainan Free Trade Port, it will promote the opening up and reform in Hainan province. We need to beef up our efforts on openness. So we will have a lot of systemic innovation, making sure that different kinds of measures can be implemented. So maybe there are some restrictions and contradictions of the regulation in Hainan Free Trade Port. In order to make sure all the measures can be implemented in the Hainan Free Trade Port, there's a special section to indicate that the regulation on the Hainan Free Trade Port could submit to the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress for approval and provide archive in the State Council. And when necessary, the provincial government can provide suggestions and draft the local legislation so that they enjoy the legislative power to come up with an independent regulation on the Hainan Free Trade Port. According to the Provincial 10, for the legislative power of the People's Congress of Hainan Province and the Standing Committee could look into the actual situation of the development of the Hainan Free Trade Port, and they should abide by the stipulations and regulations of the Constitution, and they are able to formulate regulations in the area of trade and investment. So they are able to come up with the local legislation. And all of these legislation and the regulation can be exercised within the scope of the Hainan Free Trade Port. And also, it's about the regulation in the economic zone in the Hainan province. And earlier, in one of the notifications announced by the NPC, it also delegated powers to the Provincial People's Congress to formulate local legislation in the economic areas in the Hainan province. So as long as they abide by the decisions by the State Council and the National People's Congress, as well as the stipulation and provisions in the Constitution, as well as other administrative regulations, they're able to roll out the local legislation. And for these legislations shall be submitted to the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress and put into record for the State Council. If there are some changes for these local legislation, they have to provide explanation to the State Council and the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. And also, we are focusing on certain legislation and the regulation to boost the liberalization and facilitation of the trade and investment. So this is an innovative arrangement. In the past, we never have this kind of arrangement in other regions. That said, while Hainan province is compelling the Hainan Free Trade Port regulation, if some of the provisions are related to the pre-established law approved by the National People's Congress and its standing committee, meaning that the Hainan province are able to amend certain provisions. However, if they are going to make some of the changes of those local legislation, they have to submit to the standing committee of the National People's Congress and the State Council for further approval. For the Hainan Free Trade Port regulation is a new measure. We don't have any lessons to learn from. So we have to receive the unified leadership from the CPC Central Committee and making sure that all of those local legislation are following the stipulations indicated in the Constitution of People's Republic of China. Thank you. Next question. With CCTV, so for some of the eligible companies in the Hainan Free Trade Port, I believe these companies and market entities are able to receive some of the preferential policies and the measures. Can you tell us more about this? What are some of the preferential policies they are going to enjoy, especially for the operation of these market entities? So you raise a very important question. Actually, it is a very technical issue. So when we are saying we need these market entities to operate in the Hainan Free Trade Port, so these market entities will enjoy the preferential taxation policies in Hainan province. The Taxation Bureau of the Financial Department earlier published a notification. They also come up with a concrete idea on what it means by operation of the market entity, meaning that the managerial team should stationed in the Hainan Free Trade Port. And also, the market entities that are stationed in the Hainan Free Trade Port will subject to the regulation of the provincial government and also the regulation of the Hainan Free Trade Port. On March the 5th, the State Taxation Bureau, the Hainan Market Supervision Department, and the Hainan Province Taxation Bureau have published a notification on the requirement for the market entities in the Hainan Free Trade Port. And they also clarify the requirements for these market entities and the companies. As for the definition for all of these market entities, we have looked at 4 aspects. First, we need to look at the registration information of those enterprises. So these enterprises shall only be registered in the Hainan Free Trade Port, and there are no other branches operating in other parts other than Hainan Free Trade Port. And also we are looking at the assets and the operation of these certain entities. And for these enterprises, they have to be fully operated inside of the Hainan Free Trade Port. So if they're not operating in Hainan Free Trade Port, so these companies will not be eligible to receive those preferential policies. So I would like to emphasize, for these market entities, they need to have a certain site, a certain place for the production of their products inside of the Hainan Free Trade Port. And also, they have the managerial team and the employees stationed in the Hainan Free Trade Port. And also for these entities, when they're signing the labor contract with employees, the duration of the labor contract shall last at least for 1 year. And also for all of the archive, the labor relations, and also the financial records, all of these shall be within the scope of the Hainan Free Trade Port. When we say the assets in the Hainan Free Trade Port, meaning that for the operator, they need to obtain the right to use all of those properties and assets inside of the Hainan Free Trade Port. And for the second scenario, for some of the market entities, they register in the Hainan Free Trade Port, but for these companies, some of them, they are opening up branches in other places other than the Free Trade Port. But we have to focus on those registered entities and the companies. So still, we have to look at their human resources and also their financial resources, making sure that all of these resources are within the managerial scope of the Hainan Free Trade Port. And also, for the entities that has been registered in the Free Trade Port, they have the full right to manage their employees. And also for some of the enterprises, they register outside of the Hainan Free Trade Port, meaning that their headquarters is stationed outside of the Free Trade Port, but they set up branches inside of the Free Trade Port. And we need to look at the situation of those branches to see whether they have the capability for production, whether they have the infrastructure to run their business. And if we look at the functions, we also need to look at the compensation and the value of the assets of those branches. This is the third scenario. Fourth, it is other enterprises. For the fourth scenario is actually quite similar to the third scenario. We need to make sure that for all of these market entities and the enterprises have the capability to produce. Well, I understand I explained in a very technical way. So this is the fourth scenario that has been indicated in the notification published by the Provincial Standing Committee and the provincial government. So all in all, that is to say we need to make sure all the information is open and transparent. We have to share all of these information. By receiving this information, we can better analyze whether those market entities are eligible to operate in the Hainan Free Trade Port. Two last questions. With cover news. So my question is about the ecological environment protection. I understand this time this item has been included into the law on Hainan Free Trade Ports. So can you tell us more about the part on ecological protection? Thank you for your question. And for General Secretary Xi Jinping has mentioned for several times that we have to protect the ecological environment in Hainan province because it is the natural resources in Hainan. We have to cherish all of those resources and to protect the eco environment. So in order to build the Hainan Free Trade Port, we have to give full play for the ecological environment and to exercise the idea of blue sea waters and lush mountains are as good as gold. And in the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, we actually include an independent chapter on ecological protection. This also shows China's determination to protect the environment in Hainan. So by having this legislation, it poses a lot of requirements for us to protect the environment in Hainan. And for the provincial government, we will work with relevant departments to implement the instructions from General Secretary Xi Jinping. We will abide by the law on Hainan Free Trade Port. We will focus on 3 areas. So first, in terms of the legal foundation, and for Hainan province, we will exercise the provision on the Hainan Free Trade Port. We will improve the system of the property rights and the system of the paid use of the natural resources. We will explore more possibilities to come up with more local legislation to protect the ecosystem. And second, we will strengthen the law enforcement. We'll use the strictest measures to protect the eco-environment. In terms of the projects, we will focus on the ecological restoration. This is also one of our priority. For certain eco issues, we focus on the protection of the river, the water resources, the mining areas, and we will do more to process the day-to-day garbages, and at the same time, we will try to build up more infrastructure. In terms of the mechanism, guided by the task force, we will work as a key role, and we work with different sectors of the society so that we can form a synergy. We will use the cutting-edge technology. Also, we will use the remote sensing technology to monitor the environment for the ocean so that we can resolve some of the ecological issues, making sure that the environment can only be better in Hainan province. One last question. So for the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, I would like to understand the role on this law in promoting the trade and investment liberalization and the facilitation, where opportunities will be brought to the foreign investments. So for the trade liberalization and facilitation, it's the key areas for the law on Hainan Free Trade Port. In the past few days, many ministries have announced several laws and measures on the trade and to boost the trade and investment liberalization and facilitation. For example, the NDRC rolled out a notification to ease the market access, and also led by the Ministry of Commerce, they also published a law to improve the investment environment for foreign investors. For the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, will also provide more regulation and provisions to boost the trade and investment liberalization and the facilitation. We have come up with different kinds of measures. So we can refer to Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 all together, 14 provisions. So for these 2 chapters, they are giving a lot of stipulations on boosting the trade and investment liberalization and facilitation. So I would not read out each one of the provisions. And for the enterprises, especially the foreign investing enterprises, I would say there were many impacts. First, for the implementation of the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, demonstrates that the decision to encourage the foreign investors to station in Hainan Free Trade Port for long term. So for this law aims to build a high level investment and trade environment that is open, transparent, and predictable. So during my work, I always make contact with some of the foreign investors. They attach great importance to the sustainable development of the law. So I think by setting up rules and regulations, it will provide a stable investment environment for the foreign investments. And also will provide the high-level services, especially for the judicial services and the arbitration services to the foreign investors. For the implementation of the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, it will lay a solid foundation to promote the investment environment for the foreign investors. And also, we are rolling out the negative listing for the foreign investment. According to the law on Hainan Free Trade Port, we will fully open the investment access and bring more resources. First, we will open the investment access. Of course, we will exempt those issues related to the national security, social stability, ecological red line, and the public interest. Except for those areas, the Hainan Free Trade Port will fully open the investment access. And the second, the Hainan Free Trade Port adopts the pre-establishment national treatment plus the negative listing for foreign investment. And third, we will further ease the market access for the foreign investments. And we are rolling out a commitment system for market access for the market entities. And fourth, we will streamline the business procedures and improve the government service. And also, we will provide a lot of conveniences for the market entities and improve the bankruptcy procedures. Third, we will offer competitive and the preferential taxation policies to the market entities stationed in the Hainan Free Trade Port. For the low tariff goods and the zero tariff goods, will enjoy the transaction in the Hainan Free Trade Port. As for the reduction of the tax, as I said before, we roll out the close-off operations. We will combine some of the taxes, and also we will streamline some of those taxes, for example, the value-added taxes, the consumption taxes, maintenance taxes, etc. So after we started the close-off operation of the Hainan Islands, we will further simplify the taxation policies. And for the imported goods, the Hainan Free Trade Port will come up with a catalog. For products that outside of the catalog, their import tax will be exempted. And at the same time, we will return certain taxes imposed by the Chinese mainland products. Well, that said, for the zero tariff products, so these will be included into the positive listing. And after the close-off operation of the entire island, and then we will roll out the zero tariff program. And also we will provide some preferential policies to eligible market entities and the eligible individuals. For example, for some of 3 types of products will enjoy a zero tariff. And we always talk about the 15% tariff. So for certain enterprises that receive the preferential support from the province, and also we will give them some preferential policies, and to further reduce the tax. And when necessary, we also exempt some of the imported taxes for these goods. And also, I would like to advise for these individuals and the enterprises, please follow up closely on our taxation systems so that you could adjust your way of business model, and then you are able to receive all of those preferential policies in Hainan. Thank you, all the speakers, and thank you for your participation. That's the end of the press conference.